Well, welcome to this webinar on the exciting potential for academic development of medicines in Europe, organised by the Association of European Cancer Leagues, the ECL, and MEPs Against Cancer. This afternoon, we'll be shining a light on the role that academia can play in the development of innovative cell and gene therapies with ATMPs, Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products. We know that not all the solutions we need for cancer therapies will be found in the commercial sector. We need to properly harness the expertise of academics across Europe to develop medicines. The question is, how? We'll do so this afternoon with an in-depth look at a case study in melanoma treatment by a leading academic researcher, Inge Jedema, followed by a presentation from Rommel, who is chair of the ECL Access to Medicines Task Force and Research and Advocacy Officer at tegen kanker. He's a co-author of a new paper that we're launching today on the main bottlenecks that hinder the pathways for medicine development and how to overcome them. He co-authored the paper with Delphi Coppens. So just to introduce myself, my name is Jackie Thornton. I'm a freelance health journalist for The Lancet, the BMJ and Nature in the UK, and I'll be moderating our panel discussion that we'll be having later on this afternoon with representatives from the European Commission, the European Medicines Agency, HTA researchers, patient representatives, and other researchers. But first of all, I'm delighted to introduce a video from our MEP host, Cindy Franssen, who is a member of MEPs Against Cancer interest group, and she's setting this issue very much in the important context it deserves.
Dear participants, let me start by thanking both the European Cancer League and MEPs Against Cancer for asking me to speak to you here today during this highly interesting event. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join live, so please accept my apologies for this. We all know the enormous figures. Every year, around 2.7 million people in the EU are diagnosed with cancer. This is huge. If we don't take action, if we continue down the same path, this number is set to grow even further. In 2020, 1.3 million Europeans died because of cancer. And according to scientists, this figure could further rise by almost 25% by 2035. This is not a new message. We have heard it before. And the good thing is the message has been widely received at the political level. Both the European Commission and the European Parliament recognized the need for urgent action and put the fight against cancers high on the political agenda during this term. This attention led to the launch of the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. And in the Parliament we contributed to this plan through the report of the BECA Committee. The goals are clear. Our ambitions are high and promises were made. We have a plan covering all stages of the disease and offering a 360-degree approach. Now we need to make it a reality. A next and important step is the upcoming revision of the European pharmaceutical legislation. The amount of cancer treatments available is ever increasing and we can save more and more lives. But despite ongoing medical and technological developments, new and novel treatments are urgently needed. While around 2/3 of patients respond well to treatment, we still cannot properly treat the other third. Innovation is needed both to find new treatments and to improve existing ones, for example with regard to side effects for patients. So real innovation is key if we want to make true to our goals of the Beating Cancer Plan. Therefore, we need to increase investment in scientific research in the EU. If we work together, we have a huge potential with regard to resources, data and knowledge. Together, we can put the EU in the cockpit of scientific research. But research and innovation is one thing. If we don't manage to get these new treatments to the patients, all would have been for nothing. And here the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation comes into play. When we talk about new treatments, we need to mention advanced therapy medicinal products. These are important developments, often starting in an academic setting and funded through charity funding. Because of the limited return on investment, classic pharmaceutical companies invest less in such research. So we need to continue to provide proper incentives to keep research going. Some of these advanced therapy medicinal products are going to reach the patients via a commercial route. But we cannot be sure that all needed therapies will be developed, let alone that they will become widely available and affordable. Therefore, we need other pathways to bring these therapies to the patient. There should be a non-commercial pathway available to ensure that every European patient can benefit from new developments. I have recently asked the Commission about the need for such a pathway, to which I received a hopeful answer. The Commission is rolling out initiatives to understand the specific needs of academic developers and is open to propose such a tailored pathway. So let's wait and see what they come up with. I believe it would make a difference for patients all across the EU. And to ensure success, we will all have to work together. European and national authorities, academia, hospitals and patient organizations. Events such as this one today are important in that respect. They enable us to listen and learn from each other. I look forward to hearing about existing problems, bottlenecks and good practices. I am more than happy to further work with all of you on this important topic, also in my capacity as a member of the newly established Subcommittee on Health. I wish you all a very interesting event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed to Cindy Franssen for that inspirational message, and great to hear that she believes that with collaboration we can really work on these academic developed medicines to make a difference to patients. So let me talk through the agenda this afternoon. First, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Inge Jedema, who is the EMA Head of Translational Cellular Therapy at the Netherlands Cancer Institute. Welcome to you, Inge. We will be hearing from Rommel, as I said earlier, who is going to be talking about the overview of the bottlenecks and recommendations on how to overcome them. Vod is the chair of the ECL Access to Medicines Task Force. As you know, the ECL is a pan-European umbrella organisation which connects 31 national and regional cancer societies in 26 European countries in the WHO European region. Then we're going to be having a panel discussion, and I'm very delighted that so many very busy and important people have agreed to come and talk to us today to discuss this. We have Caroline Potter, who is the Head of Advanced Therapies at the European Medicines Agency. We also have Lina Kufo-Kashu, who's the Policy Officer for DG Santé, Unit 2D, Human Medicines Division. So welcome, Lina, to you. We have Professor Valeska Rattel, who is the head of the HTA Health Technology Assessment Unit at the Netherlands Cancer Institute at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And we have Dr. Bettina Riel, who is a doctor and founder of the Melanoma Patient Network Europe. So welcome to all of our speakers. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This is a view-only event. It's being recorded and then it will be made available on YouTube afterwards. So you'll be able to see it again or pass on to colleagues who weren't able to make it. Please do talk about this on social media. And if you tag us into your posts with the @Cancer Leagues, that would be great. And for the questions, please do put your questions into the Q&A function in the usual Zoom box, and your questions hopefully will be answered live. You can also use the chat function if you've got any technical difficulties and need assistance. So without further ado, let me introduce Inge, who's going to be talking on the academic development of tumour infiltrating lymphocytes. Thanks very much, Inge.
Yes, thank you very much, Jackie. I will start sharing my screen and put it also, and hopefully now you can see it in presentation mode. Is it all okay so? Yeah, okay. Can you confirm, Jackie, whether you can see it?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the moment. I can see it in the small version, but I don't know whether that's because of my view. Let me see.
Hi, hello. Sorry to interrupt. Everything is okay, and we can see your presentation.
Okay, great. Then I will move on. Thank you very much, Anna Maria. Well, I'm really happy to tell you about a journey from performing a randomized phase 3 trial in an academic center and then move towards marketing authorization, hopefully in the end. And I will do this on behalf of all the co-workers within the Netherlands Cancer Institute in the group of Professor John Hanen. And I will start with giving you a small amount of background about melanoma. This is a form of skin cancer with yearly increasing incidence, and it accounts for the highest number of skin cancer-related deaths. And it's very important to keep note that the prognosis of melanoma is correlated strongly with the disease states. And if you look at this figure here, and I will put my pointer on. If you look at this figure here at the right, you can see that there are different stages of melanoma defined. And when you go to stage 3, then the disease is spread to the lymph nodes. And in stage 4, the disease is spread to other organs. And today I will focus my talk on this stage 4 melanoma, which has the worst prognosis. And if we look at the historical numbers, the 10-year survival that was reported in the past was smaller than 5% for these patients. So that's really a very serious disease. There have, of course, been a lot of developments in the treatment of patients with stage 4 melanoma, especially the introduction of immune checkpoint inhibitors and targeted therapies have dramatically improved the 5-year overall survival. So if we look nowadays, what is the current practice? Then treatment with anti-PD-1 antibodies, which is a form of immune checkpoint inhibition, is frequently used, so most often as a first-line treatment in patients with stage 4 melanoma. However, if these patients fail this initial treatment, and that's around 50% of the patients roughly, then we can, of course, treat them with other checkpoint inhibitors, or we can give them a form of targeted therapy. However, the results with these therapies in this second line of treatment are quite well, modest or low, to be mentioned. So there was a great unmet need for additional effective treatment options in this patient population that failed upon first-line immune therapy. And what we decided to do is to treat them with a form of cellular therapy. So we use immune cells as living drugs. And as Jackie already pointed out, we call this cellular therapy products advanced therapy medicinal products, or in short, ATMPs. So if we go to especially treatment with tumor infiltrating lymphocyte for patients with metastatic melanoma, well, how does that work? So we start with the patient which has disease in different parts of its body. And what we first do is a surgical removal of one of the melanoma lesions. And we need more than 1 cubic centimeter of tumor material to start the TIL production process. Then we go to our GMP laboratory. So that's we have a lot of clean rooms where we can really work under pharmaceutical conditions. And there we grow out in what we call the initial outgrowth phase of the TIL production, the tumor infiltrating lymphocytes, in our case, T cells, which are a form of immune cells. And we grow them out in 48 well plates. Then we go to culture flask, and we add a lot of cytokines and some stimulation. And that's what we call the rapid expansion protocol. And we end this process in a bioreactor. And then we make more cells. And then in the end, we have the expanded TIL product pooled in one infusion bag. And what we in fact do in this procedure is that we start off in this initial outgrowth phase with a couple of millions of these tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. And upon completion of this whole culture process, we have several billions. So we have a very big army of between 5 times 10 to the 9th and 2 times 10 to the 11th. So that's the amount of proliferation that you get in this culture procedure. So this therapy is really based on expanding the numbers of cells which were already present within the tumor of the patient, but now you make a very big army that is able to combat the tumor. Then we do a pre-treatment of our patients. So we give the patient what we call non-myeloablative lymphodepleting chemotherapy prior to the TIL infusion. It consists of a cyclophosphamide and fludarabine, and we do that to make space in the patient for these large amount of cells. So you more or less reduce the amount of normal immune cells in the patient to make space for this large amount of cells that we infuse with our TIL product. Then we do a simple IV infusion of our TIL product, and then we give to the patient and infuse a couple of doses of interleukin-2, which is a growth factor that will further support the outgrowth of our introduced cells in the patient. So this very big army of cells will even further increase in the patient after infusion. Well, how does this look in practice? And this is just to show you that it's quite a cumbersome and laborious way of working. And this is typically something that can be done within an academic setting. So we harvest the tumor from the patient within our own clinics. We transport it to our own biotherapeutics unit where we can work according to the good manufacturing practice rules. We start with mincing the tumor just by hand. Then we do an enzymatic digestion to make a single cell suspension. We do some filtration, what you can see here on the bottom left. And then we initiate the culture in these 12 to 24 well plates. And we work there in flow cabinets to work on their real sterile conditions. Then we go into the flask situation. So it's not one flask, it's a lot of flasks. So it's a lot of work for the technicians. And then in the end, we end in this bioreactor, which is more or less a rocking place with gas exchange where the cells can grow out to very dense cultures of cells containing these billions of cells in around 5 to 10 liters of culture medium. So it's quite a cumbersome procedure, a lot of hands-on work, but it's really doable within this academic setting. Well, the promising results were already there from different phase 1-2 clinical trials. And the first strong indications for the clinical activity of TIL therapy or it originates already from before 2002. Especially this work was pioneered by the group of Steven Rosenberg in the NIH in the US. And they have performed also several phase 1 and 2 clinical trials, and also other partners within Europe and outside of Europe have performed these phase 1-2 clinical trials with TIL therapy for the treatment of patients with melanoma. And even in very heavily pretreated patients with large amount of tumor, which you can appreciate from this picture here, after TIL therapy, you can get complete remission of these patients and complete removal of all the tumor masses. So these immune cells can really have a very profound effect against the tumor. I think you can appreciate it from this picture. But the problem was that these were all phase 1-2 clinical trials. So no real proof evidence of the efficacy of the treatment. And that's in 2014. Professor John Hane from the Netherlands Cancer Institute and also Inge Marie Stwene from the Herlev Hospital in Denmark decided together to be so brave to perform a randomized phase 3 clinical trial to really assess the effectivity of TIL treatment in patients with metastatic melanoma. And this trial ran between 2014 and was completed last year. And I will now show you the study design, and you don't have to read all the details, but it's important to keep in mind that we randomized 168 patients with end stage, so unresectable stage 3C or stage 4 melanoma. And we randomized them, and they, at the start of the trial, these patients did not have any pre-treatment, but then a little after 2014, the treatment with anti-PD-1 was introduced, so about 85% of the patients had received anti-PD-1 as first-line treatment then. So then they were randomized, and half of the patients received TIL therapy. So they received the operation to remove the melanoma lesion for the TIL production. Then they received the chemotherapy, as I explained, then the infusion of the TIL, and then the high-dose interleukin-2 to promote the outgrowth of the cells. Whereas the patients that were randomized to the control arm, so also 84 patients, they received what was at that moment the standard treatment of choice, and that was checkpoint inhibition therapy, immune therapy with ipilimumab, which is an antibody directed against anti-CTLA-4. And then, of course, we did follow up and assess the patients according to protocol. It's important to mention here that this trial was performed according to the Conditional Reimbursement Initiative. And this means that this treatment for this patient was reimbursed by our Dutch National Healthcare Institute as part of this initiative. And in addition, we got public funding by the Dutch National Healthcare Institute, as well as SON-MW and KWF, so the Dutch Cancer Society in the Netherlands. So this study was completely performed with public money. Also important to mention is that the TIL product manufacturing was performed at 3 sites. So for the Netherlands, for the Dutch patients, we had 2 production sites. So one is our own biotherapeutics unit as part of our pharmacy within the Netherlands Cancer Institute, Antonie van Leeuwenhoek Hospital in Amsterdam. And also part of the products were produced by our neighbors from the laboratory for cell therapy of the Sanquin Blood Bank, also in Amsterdam. And the TIL products for the patients that were treated in Denmark, in the clinic of Inge Stwene, they were produced within the National Center for Cancer Immune Therapy. So it's important to keep in mind that we had decentral production of our ATMP, and before doing that, we of course had quite stringent harmonization of our production processes to show that we can make similar products at these 3 sites. And this is to show you the main result of the trial. So our primary endpoint was progression-free survival. And here is to show you in red, on the y-axis is the progression-free survival in percentage, on the x-axis is the months since randomization, and in red you can see the effect on progression-free survival after TIL therapy, which is, you can appreciate is way better compared to, and it's also statistically different compared to the progression-free survival after the standard treatment with ipilimumab. And well, like I mentioned, it's important to keep in mind that 85% of the patients had received prior anti-PD-1 immune therapy, which is at the moment standard of care. And it's also important to mention that we had a successful TIL production for almost 100% of the patients. So for 10 patients, we needed to do a second metastasectomy to get new material, but in the end, for all patients except for 1, we were able to make a good TIL product. So I think that's quite a good feasibility outcome here. Now to show you the results in a more schematic way. So what I plotted here is the best overall response divided in complete response, partial response, stable disease, and of course, a no response or progressive disease, in red for the patients in the TIL arm and in blue for the patients in the ipilimumab arm. And what you can appreciate is that there's a big difference between the overall response of 48.8% in the TIL arm compared to only 21.4% in the ipilimumab arm. And if we then look at the best category of patients, so the patients that obtained a complete response, you can also see this difference that there is a 3-fold better frequency of complete responses upon TIL therapy compared to this standard treatment with ipilimumab. So we were quite happy with these results, as you may appreciate, and we were happy that they were published in the New England Journal of Medicine in December last year. But then, what is the future? Like we outlined already in introduction, what is there for the patient? So now we performed this trial. And how can patients in Europe benefit from TIL treatment in the future now that we know that it is better than standard treatment with immune checkpoint inhibitions? And I will start off with the current situation within the Netherlands. So at the moment, we have a final reimbursement by the health insurance company as started the 15th of January of this year, based on our clinical trial results. And we also got the permission from our Inspectorate of Health to do academic production of these TILs for this patient group under hospital exemption. And we directly got the approval for 15 patients a year, also with the same starting date as the reimbursement. And this is really an exception in the Netherlands, because normally you get approval for hospital exemption for only 10 patients a year, and then you have to extend that, but we had good discussions with the Inspectorate of Health, and they understand us that we have about 50 patients a year that can in the Netherlands that will benefit from this treatment And these are the patients that fail first-line immune checkpoint inhibition. And so we directly got this approval for 15 patients a year. As I said, a second-line treatment. But are we there yet? Well, we cannot stay in a situation of hospital exemption, to our opinion, because we can only use this as bridging, because we have the risk of being challenged when other, especially commercial parties, enter the market with a TIL product with market authorization for the same indication, because then we would be no fair competition. So we decided that we have to be brave and walk the bumpy road towards EMA marketing authorization for our TIL product. And we were very lucky that together with the Dutch Cancer Society, we had very good conversations, and they agreed upon this path. And now we have received an academic pharma grant that will help us to work towards marketing authorization, because we need quite some money there, because we need a good group of regulatory consultants to help us to really compile the whole registration dossier and to work towards the EMA marketing authorization. And our aim is to keep TIL treatment available for patients at a fair price. So hopefully as an academic product. So how do we envision this? So we will now found a license holder company. It will be a not-for-profit company. It will contain the Dutch and the Danish shareholders, because we together performed this trial. So we are also together owner of the data. We will found a company because that has to do with liability that at the moment our academic hospitals are not willing to do. So we need a company that can do also the central data oversight and will be the license holder and will also be liable. Then once we got approval, we will found a separate Dutch company for academic production of TILs for the Dutch market, and a separate Danish company with academic production for the Danish market. And then in the end, of course, we would like to make the product available to the whole European market. So hopefully we can sell sub-licenses then to other EU members. And of course, that will give us some revenues that we can reinvest into new developments. For instance, TIL development for other diseases than besides melanoma. And in the end, of course, the sky's the limit. So maybe we can also sell part of the package to other third parties that can come up with marketing authorization for the rest of the world, and that will also bring in some revenues in the future. So this is the situation where we are here, and I will only shortly acknowledge the whole team, because this is a lot of work. It's a very brave attempt to do this, and you need a lot of people from different disciplines. So not only the medical sides, but also the production sides, and also quality of life, health technology assessment that Valeska will mention further, data management, of course, financing, and of course also our business development partners. And I would like to thank you for your attention. And hopefully I can stop share here. No, yeah.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Inge. I mean, it's just absolutely inspiring to hear about what you've been doing. I love it when academics are so modest and say, yes, we were quite happy with our New England Journal of Medicine publications. We were quite happy with results. It sounds absolutely brilliant. And I'm sure that the patients who had that melanoma and who had that response were absolutely delighted. But of course, I didn't think you ever went into medicine and research to become a business person, as you say, so challenges there. Thank you very much indeed for that, and I'll have questions for you later. But I now want to introduce Wad, who's going to be talking about the paper that he's put together, as I say, with Delphine. And Wad, if you could present your bottlenecks and hurdles and how to overcome them, that would be fantastic.
I will try to do that. Okay. Can you see the slides? First, thanks to Inge for the very nice presentation on academic development. I'm going to try to put it in a kind of broader perspective by presenting our paper on academic development of medicines in Europe, a paper that we have, which is made by the Task Force Access to Medicines of ECL. And so I and Delphi Coppens of the Dutch Cancer Society are the main authors. So first, why have we made this paper? As Cindy Franssen already told, there is a big incidence of cancer in the European Union, 2.7 million new diagnoses every year. And luckily for a lot of cancers, you already have good treatments. But then for some other cancers, we still have no good treatments. There are low survival figures. Some examples are brain tumors, pancreatic cancer, some hematological cancers also. So we still need new treatments. And one promising development is cell and gene therapies, therapies based on human cells and genes. And these are really promising new therapies because they often bring about long-lasting therapeutic responses. There is for these treatments, there is a specific regulatory framework at the EU level, specifically when this cell and gene therapy is considered as advanced therapy medicinal product, which means that the cell and gene therapies are substantially manipulated, or well, if the cells are substantially manipulated, or if the cells are not having the same function in the donor and the recipient of the cells, then the therapy is classified as ATMP. And this means that there should be a market authorization at European level, so it's no longer a national level. There is one exception here about which Inge already told, which is the hospital exemption. So if you have an ATMP that is only used at a national level under strict conditions, so on a small scale, in custom-made therapies, then so there can also be this hospital exemption and an authorization at the national level. We think that these ATMPs are not always commercially viable because they often are targeting very small patient groups. They often are entail very complex procedures, as Inge already also illustrated in her example. And these complex procedures are often more fit for a point of care model rather than for manufacturing at large scale. So this is why we think that not every ATMP will be commercially viable. A last specificity is that we also see that commercially developed ATMPs often have a very high price of several €100,000. But anyway, our main reason to publish this paper is that we want that every treatment with a clear added benefit for the patient also reaches the patient, and therefore we need this non-commercial pathway. And for this, to explore how such non-commercial pathway can look like, we did 4 case studies. One case study already has been presented by Inge Jedema. So this was the case study about the TIL, but then we also have a Belgian case study about the Jedema and Mesodec trials. These are trials about dendritic cell vaccines in patients with leukemia and also patients with mesothelioma. We also have a case study from the Hospital Clinic of Barcelona, which is a case study about CAR-Ts in leukemia. And then there is also a case study of an academic group in Heidelberg, and they are doing research about CAR-Ts and transgenic T cells. So, and these case studies have learned us a lot about the bottlenecks that academics perceive when they want to develop cell and gene therapies, and also when they want to bring these cell and gene therapies to the patient. So first bottleneck is that they have the impression that the existing rules are very much geared towards the industry. So the regulations to bring these therapies to the patients are not really adjusted to the means of academic groups. So for example, it's very difficult for academic hospitals to make a treatment available in other member states. Also, the existing market authorization procedures can be very expensive and lengthy. Academics are not always having the resources to navigate these procedures. And also when they have an authorization, of course, they still have a lot of responsibilities. For example, one of these responsibilities is pharmacovigilance, so which means that they have to track adverse events that would occur. Academics also sometimes are in doubt about the specific legislation that is applicable. So, for example, sometimes it's for them not really clear whether their treatment is an ATMP or whether another regulation is applicable. For example, regulations about transplantation, and this brings about other requirements and may create confusion among academics. Then a third issue was also questions about quality control, where they are confronted with control procedures that do not seem fit for therapies that entail complex procedures with tailor-made living products, such as cell and gene therapies. We often see that academics are also confronted with very strict requirements for research in early clinical phases. So we have, for example, had one academic researcher who told us that he had to provide information to be able to start a clinical trial, but the aim of that clinical trial was exactly to provide that or to collect that information. So of course, this is a very difficult situation if you want to do research. So we also have to think about these requirements in early clinical phases of research. And then, of course, if you want to administer or cell and gene therapy to patients in the clinic, then you also need the infrastructure to produce these cell and gene therapies. And if you want to produce this, you also have to live up to a lot of requirements, the good manufacturing practices. This is also challenging to do that in a standard hospital environment. And we also see that academic groups, academic hospitals are struggling to do that. Then also, if you want to bring treatment to, if you want to acquire an authorization, a European authorization for a treatment, or also if you want reimbursement for a treatment, companies of now, the authorities often expect large-scale trials, phase 3 trials, for example, because of small patient groups. Sometimes these phase 3 trials need to be multinational, and there are not always resources available to organize these phase 3 trials. In addition, also, the procedures to organize these trials or to participate in these trials can be very cumbersome. So we also had, for example, in one of the case studies, one academic who wanted to participate in such a trial, but when he had fulfilled all the necessary administrative requirements, it was actually too late to join the trial. And then what you also see is that it's often not so clear for academics how they can approach the national reimbursement authorities and how they can apply for this reimbursement of their therapies. They are also confronted sometimes with exigencies by these reimbursement authorities that they cannot fulfill. For example, there is sometimes the expectation of phase 3 trials, but if these trials are, if they are not able to do these trials because of lack of resources, then of course they are not able to acquire this reimbursement. So based on these bottlenecks, we have formulated some recommendations. We hope that we can discuss these recommendations later on in this webinar. But so first set of recommendations are about the regulatory framework. And so for the regulatory framework, we think that we should put in place a non-commercial academic pathway that starts in the laboratory and leads also to the patient. Of course, provided that the treatment is safe and effective. It should also be possible for academics to have an European authorization so that they can bring the therapy to the market in the whole of Europe. I also want to make it very clear that this non-commercial academic pathway should not lead to a lowering of the bar. These non- commercial pathway should lead to treatments that are that are safe, that are effective, and that are of very high quality. So they should pass the same bar as commercial therapies. But I think that it is necessary that we provide extra support for academics. So they need extra support to be able to fulfill all the regulatory requirements. They cannot pay the fees that are applicable for commercial companies. So there should be lower or no fees. And also we think that there should be, in the early phases of the development, also some regulatory flexibilities. For example, to deal with the intricacies of early phase research. When an academic treatment shows that it is safe and that it is also of added value, it should also be available across the EU. Every European patient should have access to it. And then for the hospital exemption, about which Inge Jedema already talked, there we see that this hospital exemption is not implemented in the same way across Europe. We see in some countries the hospital exemption is often used, and it is implemented in a feasible way. But in other countries, the hospital exemption is not really very well regulated, and it is very difficult to use it. So we think that we should also start the process to harmonize the implementation of the hospital exemption in several European countries. And so then what we have in mind is that there is a kind of that we should evolve towards a situation where you have different pathways towards the patient. So you have the possibility of the hospital exemption. Of course, you also will need commercial development, but next to that, there should also a place for more non-commercial pathways. We think if you want such a non-commercial pathway, it's also important to invest in dialogues between researchers and regulators. These dialogues should lead to a common understanding of the complexities of early phase research, and it should also lead to a quick and swift adjustment of the regulatory system to new technological developments. And then, of course, when it comes to the funding, as we need large-scale phase 3 trials in such an academic development trajectory, we should make sure that there is also public funding for these large-scale trials, and maybe also funding for academics to be able to navigate regulatory procedures. When we want academic development in place, we also need academic networks. Universities across Europe should collaborate to share knowledge, to organize clinical trials together, and also to make sure that treatments are available across Europe. So there is also maybe a role here for the European Union to support and reinforce this collaboration. And then, of course, last but not least, if treatment is safe and effective, then it should also be reimbursed, but because it's only when there is reimbursement that it will be accessible for patients. And so there should also be reimbursement procedures that are accessible to academic groups. We also believe that every treatment should have a fair price, so a price that is affordable and accessible, and leads to sustainable health insurance systems. And so we think that this academic development can also play a role in evolving towards fairly priced therapies. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. I thank you for the attention, and I hope that we will have an interesting discussion now in the panel.
Thanks very much indeed, Ward, for that really thought-provoking presentation about how these medicines can be got through to patients quickly, as quickly as they need them. Lots of recommendations there, and lots of points on the bottlenecks. So I want to open it up now to our panel discussion. So we have with me, as I say, representatives from the EMA, from the European Commission, and patients and research. But I want to come to Caroline Potet first of all. Caroline from the EMA. I mean, I wondered, what is your response to what we've heard so far from Inge and from Ward? How, can the EMA introduce such a pathway with lower fees and easy access across the EU?
Yes, thank you, Jackie, and thanks for the very inspiring presentation indeed. It's, I mean, the first presentation is very nice to see what appears to be a very successful story so far. So let's hope that continue that direction. So, I mean, I guess before maybe touching on the recommendation, it's fair to say that we have realized, within the agency and the network, that academic developers are a true source of ideas and research elements for drug development, especially for ITMPs, but the translation into product to patients has been very slow and low. We only have, I guess, 18 advanced therapies approved in Europe currently. And I think 7 within oncology, including 6 CAR T cells. And you will all be aware that not necessarily in oncology, but there have been a few withdrawals since the beginning, and more recently, including 2 last year, because of market access situation and mostly associated with commercial rationale from the company. So the agency has launched a number of initiatives towards help in terms of academic development, because we also realize that the pharmaceutical industry may not want to go in some, especially some niche indications where the return on investment might not be. So taking the first recommendation around the alternative development non-commercial academic pathway, it was mentioned there is already in the regulation this path which has been foreseen for exceptional situations when there is nothing else available. And that was actually very well illustrated by the presentation from Inge in terms of the risk. Once you are in hospital exemption, what can be the situation if there is a product coming in. Indeed, that's my understanding from the regulation would be that that would then become no longer exceptional, I guess. But then at the same time, it's outside of agency remit. But it's true as well that we've heard and acknowledged that throughout discussion that the implementation, because it's at national level, could be optimized. And for that, I guess I will leave the floor later to my colleague from the European Commission. On the registration trajectory with lower regulatory fees, there are a number of schemes that are available, especially around scientific advice, where for orphan medicines and for products under PRIME, the priority medicines, then there are a number of reductions. And even for ATMPs, actually, scientific advice for ATMPs is reduced by 65%. In terms of the fees. But we also have recently launched at the agency a pilot program, which is limited so far to up to 5 ATMPs, where we indeed are offering fee reductions. And we are looking at not only having these reductions in terms of scientific advice, but in terms of potentially for the initial marketing authorization, and possibly some kind of deferral for the post-approval process. Now, having a truly separate pathway for academic, due to rare disease, small patient population, niche personalized treatments, I think this is probably a different matter that would need to be driven by scientific considerations, and I don't I don't think personally, and that's more of a personal view, that would be realistic to look at it from the nature of a developer. However, I guess there are a number of also initiatives within the agency and the network in terms of looking at the possibility at, you know, there are guidelines around small populations, or also looking at what level of evidence would be needed, and that you can do via an early dialogue. So we can help in terms of supporting academic developers to come up front with a minimum fees to discuss the programs, but per se a fully academic pathway, completely separate, almost a parallel pathway, I think that would probably be very challenging. Looking at my notes, because there were so many recommendations. Again, I think in terms of clinical trials, we are aware that not only for academic, we hear that the European setting may not be fully attractive, and for a number of reasons, that's even more the case of the ATMPs. But again, the agency is involved in a number of initiatives under the Accelerated Clinical Trial EU, so the ACT-EU, and we are at least trying to link somehow all the actors together, although really the scope of a clinical trial review remains with member states. But we do have specific support there offered to academic in terms of even submission via the new cities platform that has been put in place following the implementation of a clinical trial regulation. And maybe I'll stop here and see whether there are any follow-up questions.
Thanks, Caroline. That's great and interesting information that you've introduced there. And we'll come back to the later discussion in terms of the limits you say that there may well be for having an academic pathway. But I just want to ask, you know, Ward mentioned earlier that it wasn't a lowering of the bar in terms of the stipulations and rules that would have to be used by academics developing these medicines, but industry may well see it as a deregulation of academics or a lowering of the bar. How can they be won round, and what do you think they'll think about the paper?
Yes, and that's exactly, I think the idea is I think on the slide there was a mention of, you know, additional regulatory support, provide maybe additional tools to academic developers. That's certainly something that we are hearing, and we are looking into how we can accommodate that. But indeed, going back to my former point, having per se or describe it as a, you know, as a non-commercial academic pathway for ATMPs would be difficult to position, because what would that be if it's not lowering the bars? And that's where I think I would find it more difficult to comment on this.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much indeed, and I'll bring you back later on into our discussion. But let me now bring in Lena. Lena, what's DG Santé's and the Commission's role in all of this? I mean, what do you think about a tailored pathway, and your response to the paper, please?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And indeed, it was very inspiring, the first presentation. The ATMPs are redefining the treatment of many diseases and give to patients, provide to patients therapeutic options which were not visible in the past. As you know, DG Santé supervised the implementation of the ATMP regulation, and which is part of the pharma legislation, and especially for the involvement of academia and university hospitals in the development of ATMPs. We had a consideration of the hospital exemption, of how the hospital exemption is implementing across Europe. So to this end, we took the initiative to organize two meetings because while the big project of the pharma revision was ongoing, and we had a meeting with representatives of academia, of different organizations like the European Society for Blood and Marrow Transplantation, the European University Hospital Alliance, the European Eye Bank Association. And we organized the discussion in a way that it will result in a meaningful conclusion. So we have summarized 10 main points from this meeting that we have with representatives of the academia. And of course, the first and main point is that indeed there is a huge divergence of national hospital exemption rules. In terms of both what are these national hospital exemption rules in place in different member states, but also the purpose of utilization. And there are different, I can give an example. In Spain, more or less, the hospital exemption is like a different pathway in the sense that the requirements are very strict. They require clinical evidence from clinical trials. They require compliance with good manufacturing practices, more or less equivalent requirements that are required for centrally marketing authorized ATMPs. But this is not the case. There are other European countries that followed a completely different approach. I'm not going to, because I have a very limited time, and it's not the purpose to describe in detail the meetings. On the other hand, we have the position of the industry, which is very clear that the hospital exemption should remain exemption, and otherwise, if any other thought to allow the evolution of the hospital exemption into a tailored pathway for university hospitals, this would lead to a tiered, a double standard, let's say, of ATMPs. So there are valid points from both sides, from the academia and the industry. From the academia, for example, what should be the number of patients that are eligible to receive products that are developed under the hospital exemption when there are no concerns about the safety and efficacy of these products. But on the other hand, the industry have the opinion that once there is a centrally authorized ATMP for a specific therapeutic indication, then the hospital exemption products should not be allowed to be administered to patients. Now, we understand that, and there are, you can find in the literature a number of studies that they have provided a comparative analysis of the implementation of the hospital exemption. But we realized to a large extent the implementation of the hospital exemption is unknown. So we want to conduct a dedicated study in order to collect data, more precise and accurate data on the implementation of the hospital exemption, and also what are the recommendations, how we will facilitate university hospitals and academics to use this pathway, or in what direction this pathway should go. So one initiative is this, I said, the meetings, the hospital study. We have now what we have in the current revision that will be published, will be adopted, we hope, by end of April. We took into account some of the recommendations for harmonization of the hospital exemption rules. And in the current revision, hospital exemption remains an exemption, but we have added some requirements that were not in the current pharma legislation, and these requirements is that there will be a notification of these approvals, of the hospital exemption approvals, to the agency. So it remains a national competence as it is now, but the additional requirement will be that once the national competent authority approves the hospital exemption, then it should notify the agency. The same obligation applies when there is a withdrawal. And also another very straightforward requirement will be that the holders of the hospital exemption approval should be obliged to collect the data and report these data to the competent authorities at least annually. And also it will be a repository, the national competent authorities and the agency should be responsible to organize and maintain a repository of this hospital exemption implementation data.
Lena, if I may just ask you a question, because I think we're a little bit short of time. We want to come on to some other questions later on, but in response to the what you've heard from Vod, I appreciate that you can't speak ahead of the legislation, the revision coming out, but do you generally welcome the discussion that the paper brings?
Well, for the recommendations, I think at least to the recommendation related to hospital exemption, what I said responds in a positive way, because we took into account this request for harmonization, and also we will have an implementing act that we will give more technical details, and it will allow more harmonization. For the separate because this paper, the main point regarding the regulatory framework is to have 3 parallel systems: the central authorization for commercial products and non-commercial pathway, and also the hospital exemption. First of all, I would like to stress one thing, that right now the thinking behind the pharma legislation is not whether who is the developer, whether it's a private economic actor or it's a public entity. The principles are about the evidence on quality, safety, and efficacy, and this, I mean, there is no distinction we cannot claim that the current regulatory framework is oriented towards commercial or private companies. But of course, I understand that the academics, they may lack the logistics, may lack the regulatory knowledge. And for that, as Caroline from the agency has mentioned, we have support tools. Now, I would just add one more point, that with the revision of the pharma legislation, we have included a new concept of regulatory sandbox, and I think maybe this would serve in this direction, that the non-commercial pathway, because we say that when there is a need to develop some medicinal products, that it's impossible to comply with the current regulatory requirements due to their characteristics or their methods of production, then the Commission can establish a regulatory sandbox. So it will be a completely tailored-made regulatory framework from these products. I think this it's very close to what this paper asks for a non-commercial pathway.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Lena. I'm conscious I want to come on to questions. We have got some questions coming in for the audience, which is great, but I do want to hear from our other speakers. So our next speaker is from the health technology assessment world. So welcome to you, Professor Valeska-Rattel. What do you think about, or how does the HTA's assessments fit into all of this? It's a complicated business with reimbursement.
Thank you. Thank you for this invitation to speak today. Yeah, I really want to compliment on Inge's presentation, but also this nice paper presented today. I think it touched upon very good points towards the ATMPs and the implementation of that. And we saw from the TIL study, we had a lot of good points already, collaboration with another country in Europe, but also the early dialogue with our health technology assessment body in the Netherlands, which helped a lot. But the risk of this commercial way is also still there. So if you see the role of HTA in that, so HTA is what we do there is a broad evaluation of new or existing health technologies or innovations. And we are not looking only at effectiveness and cost effectiveness, but also the organizational issues and patient-related issues. And what we often do is an early assessment. So in early stages, we do a first cost effectiveness analysis of the new, and in this case, we did this for the TIL treatment compared to ipilimumab. And there we also drafted some scenarios. So in the looking at the future, so if you have implemented this TIL treatment in real practice, or this commercial pathway would be realistic, it could also be a scenario. What does this mean? And all this information we gather by means of these evaluations. It's information for policymakers, so the national agencies, but also for EMA and the national policymakers. For the TIL study, we calculated this also based on the trial Inge just presented, and there with this, this is information where these decisions could be based on, and for the Netherlands it's now reimbursed, but we have also a responsibility, I think, because this whole study and our lab is based on public funding. We have a responsibility also to keep this price, because the price we calculated it's quite low, relatively low, if you compare it to, for example, the CAR-T product. We have a responsibility because it's based on our money, to keep this price also as fair. So by that, I think, yeah, the recommendations in this paper, hopefully this will work and make people realize that all our forces and all our knowledge is necessary to bring this further.
Thanks, Valeska. I'll leave it there for the time being because I want to move on to Bettina because
yes,
we're over time. But thank you for that. But Bettina, obviously, it's very important to hear the patient voice. What do you think of the recommendations of that Voddis put forward earlier on?
Okay, so thank you. And maybe in the interest of time, also integrate what has been said by previous speakers, because that's always the nice thing when you go last. So you have a bit more time to think and to reflect. So I'm very much in favor of hearing that this is not about lowering standards, because I could only echo what Carolina and Lena have already said, is there's no reason to make a difference between an academic, a commercial, or whatever product, because if you think of it from the patient perspective, if you suffer a side effect or you die, you don't care what it was from and who produced it. And I think there's some logic in it that we have to stick to. I am the founder of the Melanoma Patient Network Europe. My husband died of melanoma in 2012, and we are very intimate with the TILS trial that run at NKI. So we have also seen what did not work so well. So if you look, for example, at the timeline of this trial and how long it took to get to where we are today, I don't think that is something that we should consider attractive. That was one of the big issues. I would also say that we have seen from very close up the struggle that the academic centers had to do what they're supposed to do. And from my experience, from my perspective, there was a clear lack of regulatory and drug development expertise, and they were always hit too late by something they should have done way before. And I think it is unfair to blame academics for not knowing something that they were never taught, because I mean, I'm a medic by training. So I mean, the academic pathway is already long. We cannot add this on top. So what I would rather like to see is some support system that can take that over. So if there is a promising academic product, there should be a complementary something, and I wished I knew what that something was, but something that could provide that expertise. For example, with GMPs, regulatory, anticipate a proper trial design that anticipates regulatory and also HTA concerns. To build on that, for us, access was a real issue. Already access to the trial was problematic because only Dutch patients could enter. And also even now, also the same problem as in Denmark is access to the trial. There's another one in the UK where patients self-finance. We had patients selling their houses in order to finance these treatments. And I think that is something that we have to take very, very seriously. And it cannot be that we have a local product that is great, but that does not reach. And from my perspective, so I very much welcome and congratulate the colleagues from NKI that they are now considering a commercial, well, not commercial, but a more like a setup as a business case, whether it is a commercial business or non-commercial or partial commercial, I think is to be remained. But I think that is the way to go to deliver a product. And I very much value the perspective that they have the ambition to make it available outside the Netherlands. Because for me, impact depends on access. And if we cannot ensure the access, the impact of any innovation will be limited. And I was one of the 15 experts on the EU Cancer Mission Board, and we talked a lot about how to make a real impact at European level and how can we ensure that innovation reaches patients wherever they are. And one fear that I would have if we focus too much on the local hospital exemption setting is that we advantage those who are already able to do this today, while there were many in Europe who are not able to produce these products. So we would increase inequality instead of decreasing it. So what I would like to see, and that would be my kind of wish for the European level ambition, if you looked a little bit at the BECA, so the Beating Cancer Plan and the Cancer Mission that integrates into it, but that kind of aligns with European strategies right now, and ATMPs are just in the middle of it. If you think about European resilience, autonomy, where we want to be in terms of ATMPs at a global level, I believe that our ambition, especially if at European level we support this development, access should be an integral part of it. So I actually, from my perspective, I would rather not like to see a simple support of a single initiative that is local. For me, this universal access should be part of any support that is provided to these institutions. So you get support, but the final product has to be available to everyone in need. And I personally would not rely on good intentions. We will provide a product that is available. I would like to see something that, for example, what the Gründer Fund does in Germany, that funding is provided under the retention of certain types of shares or certain type of conditions, so like a corporate social or like a social responsibility business. So I think we need to come up with a certain clever business model that ensures that we'll really reach what we want. Because obviously, I believe, I have a PhD in biomedical sciences. I've done a lot of cloning, so I'm fascinated by these therapies and top of their efficacy. I believe it's a fantastic space for innovation. A lot has to happen for solid tumors because they work in liquids, but not so well in solids. So if we want to accelerate that, we need this ecosystem around our academic centers that move it towards it. And I stop there, but I think it's an exciting space, but we have to put some thought on there. And just actually one last point. I was actually at DIA last week, and there was a session on the regulatory sandboxes on there. And I think that is a very valuable space, and academics have to engage more in this space because the regulatory authorities are thinking about what is coming. There's a lot about horizon scanning ongoing, and I would like to see a more active role of the academic community in these discussions. If we're not there, if we're not visible, we cannot expect downstream actors to know what's coming. So I think we need this interface where we all contribute to the discussion. Thank you.
Tina, thank you so much for that passionate contribution to this important debate. What I took from your words were, obviously some of the recommendations talking about taking things away, and you're very much talking about support, adding things to academic work rather than taking away some of the aspects in the regulatory procedures. Let me come back to Inge briefly, Inge, because we are over time and I want to come to some questions. But Inge, having heard from what our speakers have said so far, did you want to come back to any of them to respond to any of their points? Obviously, we've heard from some that maybe a parallel system is harder to envisage that maybe than the academics want. What do you say, Inge? How would you support the recommendations that are in the paper going forward, having heard what has been said?
Yeah, I firstly would like to say that I completely agree that lowering the standards is not an option. So I completely agree upon it. And I think that even if as academic investigators, you don't have to ask for that. I know that some are doing it, but I think we have to stop doing it. So if we want to make a medicine, we have to make a good medicine, and that's what patients deserve. And I really appreciate the talk that Bettina gave, and I fully understand your frustration about the time that it takes to develop medicines within an academic setting. And I appreciate that. And it really takes too long. What we're currently doing is also to discuss with our own competent authorities that if academic hospitals apply for a clinical trial, that they are already forced, even if it's a first in human trial in phase 1, that they have to start thinking about what's next. And I think that's one of the things with the TIL trial, although we were in the preliminary reimbursement program, there was not a good plan of how to bring it to the patients, how to bring it to what we call the market, whether or not that's a commercial market or not. It's not about money. It's about money in our healthcare systems, but it's about making these medicines available to patients. And I think that's something that we have to learn. And Jackie commented that, well, I'm a scientist, I'm not a business developer, but I think it makes our work more interesting to start thinking about it. So we also have to educate researchers that it's not enough to develop something, but you have to start thinking about also the next steps. And we need a complete team to do that. And I think that's where we are at the moment. I think that's really improving at the moment. There was also a question that I saw in the Q&A about how do we think about public-private partnerships. I think there are options there, but then again, we have to see how do we keep it affordable together. So I'm a fan of public-private partnerships. We also do that in development, but we again have to think, how do we make these medicines available and how do we keep it affordable? And I think that's a responsibility that we have to take together. And some of these ATMPs are more suitable for local productions like the TILs, whereas other products like a CD19 CAR T cell can very well be made in a centralized fashion. So we have to think about for every product what would be the best way forward. And I think I leave it to that if you're okay, Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Inge. And I think, yeah, if you're right, there is a question here about public-private partnerships for the development. I mean, I wonder if I could come back to other speakers. I mean, I wonder, is that one for maybe Carolyn? You know, public-private partnerships, the ones you said, you know, you said that there have been 18, I think, therapies developed that have been approved in this area. Have these all been solely commercial? Have, you know, what do we think about public-private partnerships? Is this the way forward?
That's an excellent question. I mean, so some of the approved ones have started in academia or in consortia. So, but then indeed, so far, all of the final license holders are from private pharmaceutical industries, and including those that were withdrawn. Who decided to focus on outside Europe or for other reasons. Now, I think we might be facing a situation where this could change in the near future. And I think that will be a good, and we've also seen obviously the presentation from Inge in terms of the TIL for melanoma. And I think we will have to see how this translates also in terms, and that was really well highlighted in terms of some of the presentation from Rod around what it means in terms of the liability, the pharmacovigilance, and all of the responsibility that at the end a license holder has when a product is on the market. And I think that's going to be the most challenging part. But certainly, I mean, I would say the US have been more proactive in terms of supporting private public partnership. They have a number of initiatives, including for gene therapy for rare disease, and certainly something we should think about in Europe.
Okay. Did anyone else on the panel want to come in on public-private partnerships before we move to another question? I can see that. The people on my gallery, I can't see any hands up at the moment. I just want to throw open a more broad question, which is, you know, are these the right recommendations in the white paper? Are there any others that aren't on there that you think should be included? Or and maybe another question is, which of the recommendations do you see as being the most straightforward to adopt? Who would like to take that one on? What about Valeska? Oh yeah, you've got your hands up, so that's great. And I think then we come to Bettina. Yeah, Valeska.
Yeah, what I saw in the recommendations about the reimbursement, indeed, it's just the final one on harmonization across Europe on HTA procedures. I think that's a really good one. It is also the idea of the UNETA. This is the European Abroad HTA program, but there are also some steps to make there. But this would really be good if we not have to do all the trials in every country separately and do all the rules separately from each other. It will really take some time. Yeah, would help if we can really do this.
Okay, thank you, Valeska. Bettina, you wanted to come in.
So I mainly have 2 points. So one of them is that I don't believe that, I don't believe in a separate pathway. I also don't think that just having a market authorization is sufficient to really ensure that products reach patients. We've seen this over and over, that it's not sufficient. So we need a system of thinking how to get these products to the patients in need. And last but not least, I really believe that because we have been in this space for some time, that we have to step up and really support academics. And I don't think that it is sufficient. I agree with Inge that training researcher and making them aware of it is a good step, but I don't think we can make them into mini regulators, mini drug developers on top of everything else. So I think we need some body or like a system supporting them that academics can then approach. So we need to train about awareness, but then someone can help support and take over. This is the piece I see missing in a way.
Yeah, thank you, Bettina. Lena wants to come in.
Yes, thank you. One of the things that the people from academia mentioned to us is that it's outside their remit, their competence to provide the European single market with medicines. So to this end, I think a tailored pathway, we must think the public-private partnership where the academic setting serves for the development, for the product development, and then the private company steps in to commercialize the product, because I don't think that the academic settings are interested to commercialize products, because marketing authorization means access to the market, just for a reflection. And the second point is for the clinical trials, that is indeed, there was a handle for the gene medicine therapy where we had different requirements at national level. So the sponsors of clinical trials had to make different requests to member states. And now with the new provisions with the pharma revision, we address this issue.
Thank you, Lena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a quick one before I hand over to Ward for some final comments, and he's got a question directed to him as well. But in terms of what next steps, what needs to happen for some of the recommendations in the paper to move forward? I go to Carolyn first of all. What's the next steps, Carolyn?
That's rather complicated. So the next step, I mean, I was actually going to raise my hand on the previous one. There are a number of considerations that I think we are already not midway, that would be, but 1/3 of the way, I guess, around regulatory flexibility. And I'm giving an example around good manufacturing practices. I mean, there is already some flexibility for ATMPs. There is a special good manufacturing practice for ATMPs. And there is a whole framework around quality where we need to indeed adjust also to the quality development and pharmaceutical development, the possibility of semi-automated platform and so on. And I think we have to move with the science. So regulatory has to follow science. And I think that's where I see that would be, in my mind, one of the first steps we should do, and really working closely together with academia and other researchers on this, and ensure that we don't make it so difficult for everyone.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just to say that, yeah, thank you for that question from Thomas de Voort about public-private partnerships. We have a comment from Mark Dooms saying, in case of drug shortages of an ATMP, hospital exemption can bring a possible solution during that shortage. So thank you for that comment. I'm surely going to hand over to Ward for a final wrap up. But just to say that here is a question for him, so maybe he could address this in his comments. At the level of EMA exists from 2016 the PRIME procedure, destined for products addressing unmet needs, which provides early scientific dialogue and accelerated assessment. The majority of the products approved through PRIME or ATMPs. Is the PRIME framework adequate for academic research, or do you have concrete proposals to improve it? So that's a question for you, Ward. And then I wondered whether you could introduce some concluding remarks on what we've heard today. We've heard lots of information. I'll pass it back to you, Ward, now.
Okay, well, on the question about PRIME, in the paper we do not really analyze PRIME, so we give an analysis of thresholds and problems that academics have encountered, but there is not really an analysis of the PRIME scheme in it, so I cannot give a thorough answer to that. But then I think this webinar gave us a lot of very interesting input to continue our work. So for us, of course, it remains very important that cell therapies and gene therapies with an added value are actually developed and also reach the patient. And I think it was very good to hear that everybody recognizes that there may be a problem here, so that we cannot solely rely on commercial development. And so I think it's also good to hear that in the Commission there is a process going on to improve hospital exemption, that there is also this sandbox procedure that could be a way forward. I also I'm very happy, or I think the idea of Bettina is also very valuable, that we should develop an ecosystem around academics to support them, because indeed we don't think that academics can do this all on their own. So that there should be support for them. There should be new business models. So we should think about that. So. I think we are very inspired to continue our work, to continue thinking and discussing and advocating for improved processes and to improve the cancer therapy. And I want to finish by thanking everybody who participated, to the people who presented, who participated in the webinar, in the discussion, and also to the audience. Thank you for participating.
Thanks very much. And just to say that if you want to read the paper in its entirety, it's on the ECL website at cancer.eu. So please do look at that. And we value, I'm sure, any comments going forward. Thanks again from me for our great panel with some really insightful comments. And thanks to ECL and to our MEP host. Thanks very much indeed, everyone.